We now may have motivation for a previous shocking event with gold in Mali. With this newest development, let's talk about it as we explore. It is pretty amazing to see how events can turn and what motivations may lead a nation to make a move with gold, and Mali is doing just that. Mali is a nation that comes from a region that is rich in the history of gold in Africa, and this latest story is a pretty big new development because Mali is now beginning to build Russian-backed gold refineries. This is big news, and it gives us some insight as to what's going on in the nation, and not only there in Mali, but also with Russia. There's a lot of geopolitical implications that will take place with this for sure. This is an article I'm referencing here from BBC, and one of the few that are reporting on this. But nonetheless, before I get into that, I want to remind you of channel sponsor Summit Metals. For all of your gold needs, check them out. Elevate your wealth with Summit Metals. Mali's military junta has started building a gold refinery in partnership with a Russian conglomerate called the Yadran Group. The project would embody the West African nation's assertion of its economic sovereignty and ensure that the nation benefited from its mineral wealth, according to military leader General Assami Goïta. He has strengthened the military and economic ties with Russia since seizing power in a coup in 2021, while reducing relations with former colonial power France and other Western nations. And we see what's happening here. Coups, and that's what happens a lot in these African nations. This is why the continent of Africa, in many cases, kind of tends to, go in the opposite direction that it should. With Western influence, typically countries in in Africa have done very well, and that's just history. Now, obviously, I'm not for conquering, but nonetheless, with that influence, typically there has been success. Then you move. Then there's coups that come over, there's corruption that occurs, and there's corruption in Western nations too. We know that for sure, but there's systems and checks and balances in most democratic type nations that you see in the West. There's much less of that in the East and in the Middle East. But this reflects a broader trend in the region, with neighboring Burkina Faso and Niger also pivoting towards Russia after an overthrow of civilian leaders. There you go. Another example. We see this move. Now, China also has a great influence in Africa. In fact, there very well may be a sort of a race between Russia and China for influence on the continent here. But Western firms have since been facing a tough time. We talked about this in a previous video, about the latest example being Mali's decision to put a huge gold mine run by Canadian giant Barrick into administration, effectively bringing it under state control. Yes, I remember talking about that. That was a pretty big deal for sure. Now we may have some of the impetus as to what was the motivation behind that with this latest move that is occurring there in Mali. On Monday, General Goïta, along with the Yadran Group head Eric Silikov, attended a ceremony for the construction of the refinery, which will have a 200-ton capacity in Sanou, not far from the capital, Bamako. Mali would having a majority stake in the refinery, and Yadran Group a minority share. So Mali is going to be using their state resources to do that. And of course, whenever the state runs any and everything, there's going to be problems, and it's ripe for all kinds of different corruption, that type of deal. Rather than letting private enterprise, do it, and, with some reasonable regulations. But nonetheless, there you have it. Of course, with previous contracts that were under, of course, some of the members of Barrick, I think, were actually imprisoned for a time through the previous situation there. It's pretty concerning. And now they're making this move here Mr. Salikov hailed the plant as a win-win for both nations, saying the aim was to turn the refinery into a regional center for processing gold extracted not only in Mali, but in also neighboring countries like Burkina Faso. No date has been announced for the completion, but General Guaida said it's a long-awaited dream of the Malian people, and today it's becoming a reality. The plant would enable Mali to refine all the gold mined on its soil, ending decades of crude export to foreign refineries, he added. Now, obviously, that's a good thing for them to have their own refinery. No problem with that. But just how they're going about it is another, and they're using state entities such as the Yadran Group in Russia in developing a relationship there. And why is this happening? Well, Mali is Africa's second biggest producer of gold, with the first being South Africa. But many of its people remain poor 65 years after independence. And that just goes to show you that there's been corruption along the way. And certainly this latest coup is not going to be any better for the people, obviously, there either. But nonetheless, you have a refinery, and that's going to bring some economic activity, even if the state's involved in it. But still, what it is going to do is going to set up Mali to be in ties with Russia, and essentially this is a move for further de-dollarization. And that is what this is all about. Less ties to things like the dollar, which has been weaponized, obviously. And, of course, we see transactions in the dollar coming down. It's eroding. The dollar's influence is eroding away. And some of that is, I think, that in some cases justifiable, especially considering what we're doing to our dollar. We are devaluing it with inflation, and that inflation is continuing to run. Now, it's not as hot as it was before, but it is still over the Fed's target of 2%. Yea, though, they continue to print these dollars. They continue their easing strategies. Quantitative easing is happening on some level in the back end with the Fed buying T-bills, Treasury bonds, and the like, and because nobody else is buying them, even with higher interest rates on them. That's a sign. But not only that, but there's other factors that are involved in all of this as well, too. But first and foremost is what happened in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine and sanctions had taken place. And so I think at this point, Russia is trying to find other ways to accumulate wealth and trade. And I think that Mali is going to be their country where they can be able to get the gold whenever they want it, need it. And they can use it, maybe even not even, they can even take it, refine it there, and use it as a launch pad for trade in Mali. That doesn't have to come back to Russia, in my view. But nonetheless, this is what's happening. This is a strategic move by Russia. Mali is going to benefit from it. And, of course, it's ripe with their current leader, military leader, another dictator, trading one for another dictator who worked for Western nations. So the world is changing for sure, and gold is at the center, and that's really what it's about. Gold has no respecter of persons. In fact, it's no respecter of elements because it doesn't react to the elements. It doesn't react to any other element. Yes, it can be combined with other metals like silver. In fact, in its natural state, as it was discovered around 700 BC in the form of electrum, which is a mixture of gold and silver. And since then, it has been used, for coins in that time period. But of course, it was around. Gold was around long before that, even, and it was seen as a thing of beauty and a measure of wealth, even before it was used in coins or as money. But now it is in money in a different form, long after the age of the gold coin was used for transactions. Now it is used as money between central banks, measured as a Tier 1 asset. And of course, understanding what the BRICS nations would like to do, they would like to be able to trade with gold being the foundation of trust between these nations, and then also as something to combat against the hegemony of the dollar. Of course, central banks continue to add gold to their portfolio, which means their central bank vaults. And who knows, Mali very well may be adding some as well from this find and this refinery, and they may preserve their wealth with gold. They'd be smart to do it, no matter if they have a dictator or not, because again, gold is a metal that really does not have an agenda. It doesn't care whose hands it's in. It's going to be a store of value no matter what. It's going to be valuable to anyone and everyone. No question about that. So there you go. Very interesting story here. Let me know what your thoughts are about what Mali is doing with gold in connection with Russia. And I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to each and every one of you for taking the time to watch this video, and to encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.